All right, I need to give you a disclaimer at the beginning, as I want to do all the time, but I've failed to do it lately. I want you all to know that I am not, like, this is not my field of expertise. Comparative religions, I do have a minor, my PhD is, I have a minor in missiology, which allowed me to think through these kinds of things and to write about them, but really in a big picture kind of way. Not in, so I'm, like if you said expert in the field, that's not me. So what I do is I load up my head before these things. So I have read 3 books on Buddhism, and that's what you're going to hear. It's not like I'm a walking repository of all things Buddhist or even all things Asian or whatever. I need to say all that to say that I know how to research, I know how to investigate claims and that kind of stuff, but this is not my field of expertise. So I just feel like I need to say that, maybe more for those who may stumble across this video than for you as as my flock or my congregation here. But I just want people to know that this is not like, you know, you won't be able to get me in 6 months and say, hey, remember that thing you talked about in Buddhism? Let's talk about it. Because I'll have washed that out of my brain and something else will be in its place at that time. So, yeah. Well, no, I won't confuse that. I am an expert in what I'm supposed to be an expert in, but the rest of it is stuff that I know how to research and oh yeah, I got you. And it was funny. Well, I appreciate that, and the Lord, any ability of me to remember is the Lord. That's a gift from God, and so, but I do. There's only so many things you can remember in your life. There's only so many people and so much information, and some have more and some have less. But we are reaching the extent of mine when we talk about these different. Although they are super interesting. Like the books that I've read are super interesting. I read 2 books. Just so you know, 2 that are from a Christian perspective. One's called The Christian Difference, which is a large, really like an encyclopedia of different religions as compared to the gospel. That's written from a Lutheran perspective, and I've quoted you some stuff from that one. The other one is one by a guy named Dean Halverson, and I can't remember the title of it. It's a green book. I think it's called the Short Guide to World Religions or something like that. But it's written from a Christian perspective. The one that's been super interesting that I've read lots about for this, what we're going to do today, is it's called Biography of a Myth. Biography of a Myth, and it's about Buddha. And I'll talk to you more about that in a second. But that's written by a Buddhist. And so that's been super, super helpful in understanding the way that they view the world. And it's just very well written. The guy is Yale University Press is who published it. And it's fairly recent, in the last 4 or 5 years. So it's a very good book. And I'm enjoying it. In fact, even after we finish today, if we finish today, I'll continue to read the book. I mean, it's very, very well done, and I'm really interesting. Which brings me to the book of Ecclesiastes, because that's what I'm reminded of when I've been reading and studying about Buddhism. Has been the book of Ecclesiastes, and so I just want to read you the beginning. Chapter 1, and then the end, chapter 12, and to keep this idea that says we need to remember that we are Christians, and what this, because there's going to be a lot of this stuff that we talk about in Buddhism that sounds good and familiar, and we would say, yeah, I can see that, I agree with that, but we need to recognize that there is a truth that stands above all of this. So let's read this. Beginning in chapter 1, Ecclesiastes 1. Who's read Ecclesiastes this calendar year? Has anybody? I know we should have had a few who are reading through the Bible or read through it. This is not a book that most of us go to be cheered up, right? It's not, but we should be, because it's the truth and it reveals things about the Lord. So the writer, who's called the preacher, the son of David, I believe this is Solomon. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What advantage does man have in all his work which he does under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Also the sun rises and the sun sets, and hastening to its place it rises there again. Blowing toward the south and turning toward the north, the wind continues swirling along, and all its circular courses the wind returns. All the rivers flow into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place where the rivers flow, there they flow again. All things are wearisome. Man is not able to tell it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor is the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is that which will be, and that which has been done is that which will be done. So there is nothing new under the sun. And then if you turn all the way to the end, to Ecclesiastes chapter 12, and verse number 13 and 14. The conclusion, I'll wait, I hear people turning. I'll wait, sorry. The conclusion, when all has been heard, is fear God and keep His commandments, because this applies to every person. For God will bring every act to judgment, everything which is hidden, whether it is good or evil. And so that's the conclusion that he comes to. If we focus merely on this world, if we only look at this world and the suffering in the world and the fleeting pleasures that are in the world, if we only look at this world and don't realize that there is a creator beyond the world, then we will come to the exact same conclusion that the Buddha did. And so that's what I want you to understand, that apart from the revelation of God, especially the revelation of God through His Son Jesus, we will come to the same conclusion, which is everything is just repetitive. Everything is vanity. That word vanity in the Hebrew is breath. It's called hevel, which is just vapor. Or, this morning it was 52 degrees when I woke up and got outside, which wasn't quite cold enough to see my breath. But if you get that picture of how quickly it just goes away, that's life apart from a knowledge of the one true and living God. So keep that in mind as we look through this and talk through Buddhism. It's called the middle way. It is called the middle way because it was the middle way between suffering, pain, and pleasure. And neither suffering nor pleasure were the answer that they were looking for. And so let's look at this. Why study Buddhism? Well, first, Buddhism has approximately 500 million adherents. It's the fourth largest behind Christianity is the largest, Islam is the second, Hinduism is the third, and Buddhism is the fourth with 500 million. That's about 6% of the population. And Christianity at its best number, its highest number, is only about 12% or 13% of the population of the earth. So we're talking about a large group of people. Now, I will say this, Buddhism would be larger if it wasn't for communism. You know that communism is an atheistic at its heart approach to seeing the world. In fact, the first thing that true communists do is outlaw religion. So in its heyday, Soviet Union and China, Vietnam, all communist countries with a national stance of atheism. If China was not atheistic, the numbers of Buddhists would would blow up. It would surpass possibly Christianity in its numbers if all of China were counted as a Buddhist nation, just because of the sheer numbers in China and the sheer numbers. Vietnam is a large, 20 million probably, maybe more. I'm guessing. I didn't look at that, but so we're talking about if Buddhism is counted without atheism, it would probably increase by a lot. It influences many more who would consider themselves spiritual but not religious. By the way, that is now a sociological category, spiritual but not religious, and it is the fastest growing category in America, is those who consider themselves spiritual but not religious. And what they're trying to do is blend a series of philosophies and spiritualities, spiritual things, without being connected to a religion or a church. And so they take a little bit of Christianity and a little bit of Hinduism and a little bit of Buddhism, and they blend it together, and this is where they are. But this is the fastest growing category. It's not any one religion. Some of them may even be Christians, but they consider themselves spiritual but not religious, and they're not connected to a church or to a mosque or to a temple or whatever. So you need to know what Buddhism is, because it is quickly growing in America. Its influence is greatly increased through popular media. Now, I put Star Wars on here because there was a question 2 weeks ago about Hinduism, and is that what is represented in Star Wars? Star Wars actually represents more of the Buddhist way of life than, you can think back. I know Star Wars, right? I know all 9, the first 3, I could probably quote most of them. And so they're on y'all know Star Wars? Who knows Star Wars? All right. Millennium Falcon, very first movie. Obi-Wan Kenobi is still a person. He's still he's still alive. Alec Guinness playing that part. By the way, I read something just recently. Alec Guinness asked for a certain percentage. I can't remember what it was. 2% of the gross of the movie, thinking that it was going to fail, and that he earned millions from Star Wars, even though that's not his most. Anybody know what he won an Oscar for? Alec Guinness? That's right. The bridge over the River Kwai. That's right. He won an Oscar for it. But anyway, so he's there on the Millennium Falcon, and he all of a sudden he reacts because the Death Star just blew up that one planet that was Princess Leia's parents' planet, and he said, the suffering. I've heard the voices, the voices of, I can't remember the number, 1 million souls, let's say, crying out and suffering. That is a very Buddhist concept, the idea of suffering, and we'll see that. So Buddhism is very popular. There have been even some, for the longest time, if a couple is going to get married in a movie or on TV, it would be a cleric from the Roman Catholic or Anglican persuasion. They would have the collar, and just so you could tell that's, or the robes maybe, that you could just know who that was. Then for many years it became a Jewish rabbi would do it. So it became this Jewish thing in marriages. And in the last 15 years or so, 20 years, they have branched out. Now many of those are Buddhist clerics, priests, or whatever, monks doing it, and you can see that happening. It's just a really interesting, if you were to look, I'm very aware of how they picture preachers in movies. I know you don't know why, but I'm very aware of that. And so I've noticed this progression over the last 30 or 40 years in shows of who's actually performing the wedding ceremony. And so it's just interesting to watch. So Buddhism is greatly present in popular movies. By the way, anybody want to know why Buddhism or when Buddhism really made its entrance into American culture? I've already mentioned the name of the nation. It's the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War is when we became most aware of Buddhism in America. Hinduism came over with the Beatles. Remember I said that? The Beatles were what made it popular, and then all the offshoots from that. For us, it was our connection with Vietnam. Remember, many of the soldiers, servicemen, not just soldiers, but servicemen came back with Vietnamese wives, or they connected with the peace movement of the Vietnamese, all that, and so just a lot of that came from that period of time. The 60s and 70s were not necessarily good for America. I want you to know that. I mean, they're okay, but they weren't really good for our religious perspective. And then finally, it attempts to coexist, even to partner with Christianity. I found a book written by a nun, a Catholic nun, that was where it was like, I don't know, Buddhism for Christians or something like that. And she's not the only one. There is a real thought that says that Buddhism can coexist with Christianity. And so all of this is why we ought to know a little bit about Buddhism. Before I go any further, let me tell you that I did this on purpose, Buddhism after Hinduism, because Hinduism, the worldview of Hinduism was existent or extant when Buddhism began. And so I just want you to remember that we're going to be drawing on some of the same concepts that we talked about over the last 2 weeks that we were together. So that's why we study it. Let's look at the founding of Buddhism. It was founded by a man named Siddhartha Gautama in the 6th century. So about the same time that Daniel and Nehemiah, Jeremiah, those guys were prophesying in the Near East, further over in the East, in the area of India. India at one time covered the whole expanse of Pakistan and Afghanistan and Nepal, all the way up to the Himalayas. Himalayas across the northern part that separates what we would call the subcontinent of India with China, the mainland of China, separated by the great mountain range that were almost impossible to cross. And so that's where it was founded, in the subcontinent of India, with the background of Hinduism. Much of what we know about this guy can be considered legendary material. It wasn't written down for several hundred years after he existed, and a legend grew up around him. In fact, the name, the biography of a myth, comes from this author who is a Buddhist trying to discern what actually happened, who he actually was as a person, and then against some of the different legends that come about. You know, like the Buddha had a tongue that could lick the back of his ear, right? That's probably legendary. Just saying, probably. So there are things. By the way, that's one of the marks of a Buddha, is that they have arms that reach to their knees when they're standing, and so some of these just legendary, and trying to figure out the difference between those. He was born, Siddhartha Gautama was born a prince in present-day Nepal, up closer to the Himalayas. He was of the warrior caste and affluent. So the caste system is still in the background of Buddhism, even though it doesn't take over like it does in Hinduism. It's still there. He was married at 16, and so married to one of the local girls there in that place, and her name is Maya, Maya, and she figures into. No, her name's not Maya. That's his mom's name, Maya. Anyway, what's that? No, not Myra. No, not Myra. So anyway, married at 16. So let's talk about his life just briefly. The first 29 years could be called the period of enjoyment. Remember, I'm compared him now to Solomon in the Ecclesiastes. And so he lived a very affluent, for that time, life. He didn't have a TV set, but that's probably a different reason for that. Are y'all with me? Okay, good. He didn't have a TV set. They weren't invented in the 6th century before Christ. Just want y'all to be aware. Y'all didn't even respond. Not even a groan. Not even a oh. So I just want to make sure. Like if you groan, at least I know you know that I tried to make a joke and it didn't go over. But if you don't do anything, then I'm going to think maybe you missed it. And so the period of enjoyment is first 29 years. He lived as a prince. Legend has it that when he was born, 6 prognosticators, astrologists or soothsayers or prophets or whatever you want to call them, were there at his birth. 5 of them said he was going to either be a great king, a king who would unite all the world, or a Buddha, an enlightened one. And so 5 of the 6 said he's one of those 2. They all held up 2 fingers. One of them held up 1 finger, meaning he's going to be the Buddha. So his dad, who wanted him to be a king, didn't want him to be a holy man or an enlightened person, closed him off in the palace and didn't allow him to see any suffering. Only allowed him to see the good things in life, the blessings of living there, and all of those kinds of things. So he experienced all it had to offer. The last year, when he's 29, he sees, again, according to legend, he takes 4 trips out from his castle, out from his palace, and sees 4 different things, all related to suffering. A beggar, a sick person, a corpse, and one other. I can't remember what the fourth thing, but all of these things that relate to suffering, and it shocks him to the core. He realizes that life is more than just pleasure, and that there is suffering. You could almost read that in the Ecclesiastes as you hear Solomon talking about some of the suffering that he sees. So he experiences this suffering side of life, and it messes him up. So at the age of 29, he leaves his wife, he leaves his newborn son, he leaves the palace, and goes off to what's called the period of inquiry. By the way, these segments come from a book that I read, not from me. So I told you earlier that these are from books. These segments of his life, I didn't alliterate the endings or anything like that. But he came in contact with suffering, and he goes out, and he attempts meditation, and then asceticism. Y'all know what asceticism is. Asceticism means that you give up everything and live as a monk or as a wanderer, or just trying to figure out what life is about. You renounce everything and you go out and live in the woods. So this period of inquiry, 6 years, he goes out and he does just all of these things. Now, by the way, meditation and then asceticism is the best that Hinduism has to offer. All right, I want y'all to remember that. So he's living in this It's not called Hinduism at the time. It's just the religion of the era of the time. But it's the best that they have to offer, and it doesn't satisfy. He can't come to grips with this suffering in the Hinduism mindset. And so at the age of 35, again, some of what I'm going to tell you is legendary. Some of it is probably true. And that is he comes to the end, and he's been fasting now for a long time. It says that he's come to just eating 1 or 2 or 6 grains of rice a day. That's just he's now emaciated. His hair is bedraggled. He's just in a bad way, lost his strength, and he goes and he sits under an apple tree or a fig tree, depending on what you read. He sits under a tree, and he sits down, and now he's contemplating on life. While he's there, now this is the legendary part, the evil god of the dead, whose name is Mara, not Myra, Mara, not Maya, Mara, comes to him and tempts him with all kinds of different temptations, and he overcomes. It sounds very familiar. It's a familiar theme, but he overcomes this god of the dead, and in so doing, he becomes enlightened. The word Buddha means enlightenment. So the period of enlightenment, he was weakened, tempted by Mara. He resisted the temptation and found peace in the middle way. The middle way is not suffering or asceticism, and not pleasure or wantonness. The middle way was denial of self. All right, and so Buddhism is all about denial of self. Now you can say, well, that sounds pretty noble, and it is. It's just Christless, right? There's no hope. It's just denial. Now, if you remember, I'm gonna give you a teaser here and then go a little bit further. If you remember in Hinduism, there is a thing called samsara, which is the cycle of death and rebirth, reincarnation. It's the wheel that they're trying to escape. In Hinduism, most Hindus believe that the individual soul, called the Atman, I think I introduced you to that thought. They believed that eventually, when they escaped the wheel, that their soul would merge with the great soul of the universe. Y'all remember this? Okay, yeah. So they believe that individuals have souls, and that eventually the goal was for your soul to merge with the great soul, what they would call God, but really their God is in everything. And so your soul would eventually merge, and that's nirvana. That sounds at least vaguely familiar, some of the words. Okay, good. Well, what the Buddha does is he says that all of that is an illusion. That there is no soul, there is no self, there is no I, it's all an illusion. And that when you come to this middle way and you contemplate the fact that you don't exist and that really nothing exists, that then you will escape the wheel and become part of nothing. You'll just go away. Yeah. Now, there'll be more about that in a little bit. I just want you to understand. Yes, sir.
They don't believe they don't have an afterlife?
I'll answer that. So they're somewhat Yes. Yeah. I'll get there. Maybe. I'll answer. If I don't get there, wave at me again, just like you did, and I'll answer that question if I don't get to that answer by the end. Because it's somewhat confusing.
I would say that you do or you don't.
Yeah. So Hindus believe the same thing. So when Buddha was under the tree, he had three phases. They break down. Most of the old world did it this way. They break down the night into watches, 4 hours apiece, 12 hours. You see that in the Bible where they talk about in the third watch this happened or whatever. So they have this 3 watches through the night, and in his first watch, he came to consciousness of all of his pre-existent lives, all of the lives before. And he became aware of all of those. And it's not just 1 or 7 or 10, but thousands upon thousands of these lives that he had before he existed. And that allowed him to review this, but then so Hindus believe that there is an afterlife in the sense that they'll just be reincarnated, and eventually their afterlife will be to be a part of the great soul of the universe, Brahman, the great soul of the universe. In Buddhism, the Buddha determined that's not the afterlife, that you will be born over and over and over again, rebirth, reincarnation, but if you follow his teachings, you can escape that wheel and become nothing. So escape, liberation from the wheel of suffering is the goal of Buddhism. In fact, that should lead me. Nope, we're going to just have to keep going. I was like, well, maybe. So shortly after finding his peace, he began teaching the doctrines he called the middle way, which is the middle way between suffering and pleasure. He began to amass disciples, eventually thousands of followers in his own lifetime. So it was ripe for the picking. They wanted to believe that this happened, and so he began to teach and preach, and people began to follow him. During his lifetime, in the following 200 years, Buddhism did not extend beyond the borders of what was then considered India. So it didn't spread quickly. 200 years it stayed right where it was, and you're going to see that very quickly they divided. So Buddhism is not about revelation. We would say that biblical Christianity is about God revealing who He is to us, especially finally through the person of Jesus Christ. So it's about revealing something that was concealed in our sin. Christianity, we knew God, we were created to know God, and yet sin separated us from God. And so God, through ultimately His Son Jesus, revealed Himself again to us. So it's something that was lost is revealed. In Buddhism, it's not about revelation. It's really about, it's the ultimate self-help. It's really you just coming to the place where you do the right things in order to escape the wheel of suffering. Kind of depressing, isn't it? But I mean, that's really what this is about, is escaping that wheel of reincarnation and suffering. So it didn't extend during his lifetime or for the following 200 years beyond India. So here are the 4 noble truths. This is what this is his sermon. This is the heart of Buddhism. Number 1, life consists of suffering. Anybody study Buddhism anytime in any way? So again, you did probably in literature. Yeah, in college, and so that's where I was exposed to it. When I was in college, my freshman year, it was more. We'll talk about this down the road, but it was more New Age than straight Buddhism, but I read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Did you have to read that? Anybody read that? Okay, so you did, you read that. So Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance was one of my books. A book called The Second Coming, which sounds like it's Christian, but it's not. I had to read it. I read one called, anyway, all of the novels that I had to read in freshman English, by the way, at a Christian Baptist school in Kentucky, were all these Buddhist books. When Buddhism came to America, it was nuts. It's, by the way, why I only spent 1 year at that Christian college. If you've heard my testimony, you'll know that I was tempted, like most other kids, to go away to college and to hoop it up and live crazy. And God took me to a place that taught anti-Christian doctrines at a Christian school to keep me focused on on what matters. I mean, it really is part of my testimony that while I might have been tempted in socially other ways, I was really challenged in my faith, and the Lord used it to call me ultimately in the ministry, but really call me to Himself, to keep me walking with Him. Had I gone to a school that didn't care one way or the other, I might not have been challenged in the same way that I was going to a school that I thought was going to be Christian that clearly wasn't. So anyway, number one, I learned the Four Noble Truths in this college class. We studied all this. So life consists of suffering. Number two, everything is impermanent and ever changing. All we are is dust in the wind, right? And so this is the idea of that. By the way, I just quoted a line from Carrie Livgren, Kansas, and Carrie Livgren in 1976 repented of his sins and trusted Christ, and it changed the tenor of all the lyrics of Kansas after he trusted, because he was the chief lyric writer for all of Kansas's songs. He dabbled in Eastern mysticism and Native American mysticism before he came to Christ, and you can see that in his songs as they go from like 1974, maybe even earlier, 70, all the way up until he came to Christ, and then what you see afterwards. If you want to do that, if you like Kansas, go check that out. It's pretty interesting. His biography, it's kind of an autobiography, but it's really his biography, is called Seeds of Change. And you can go read that, written by a guy named Kenneth Boa with collaboration of Carrie Livgren. Really, really interesting book. So anyway, everything is impermanent and ever-changing. The way to liberate oneself from suffering is by eliminating all desire. So if you get rid of desire causes suffering. Grasping at this world, trying to make sense of this world is what creates that desire, which is what creates suffering. If we would just not care, if we would just let it all go, and you can do that through his steps, let it all go, then it'll eliminate all desire and you can overcome suffering. Desire can be eliminated by following the eightfold path, which is next. So those are the Four Noble Truths. That embodied his teachings. So the eightfold path, the first two really are the foundation of the other six, and that is a right understanding. The right understanding are the Four Noble Truths. Right thinking, then, and the right thinking means that you don't think of yourself as important. You don't think of yourself as self. You're just part of this cosmic otherness. And so if you can get that, then you can do the rest of it. Right speech, you speak correctly. Right action, right livelihood, that is that you're giving your life to the right things. Right effort, right awareness, and right meditation. The meditation is the key. If you meditate like the Buddha meditated, you can escape the wheel too. You can escape. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more when we talk about how they view this leading to right success in just a second. So that's the eightfold path. I think I gave it all to you. The right action are the Buddha's ethics. No taking of life of any kind. So you don't kill anything. This is their life. You often see them as pacifists, and this is why. No taking of life of any kind. No stealing. We'd probably agree with that. No stealing. No immoral sexual behavior. Now, I need to say this at this point. It's really any kind of sexual pleasure, not just immoral sexual behavior, because you're really eschewing any kind of ownership or any kind of pleasure at any level. And so, because the reason why I say that is, I don't want you to see that word immoral and think that he is giving us good and bad, because there's no good or bad. There's just virtuous or non-virtuous. There's no sin in Buddhism. There's no concept of guilt. It's just life, and it's just suffering, and it's just illusory or an illusion. There's no good or bad. He didn't give these right actions because he thinks that this is wrong. This is the way, this is a virtuous life. This is a way to escape suffering. No lying, and then no taking of intoxicants. Personally, if I had to live in this worldview, I probably would drink lots of intoxicants. Because I think it's the only way that it would escape this downer kind of view. But it's the idea is that if you live this way, you will succeed in their two goals. And the two goals of Buddhism, the immediate goal, that is, in this life kind of goal, is to live such a life as to reduce suffering in the world. So if you lived according to these ethics, no taking of life, no stealing, no immoral sexual behavior, no lying, then you will lessen the suffering that's already existent in the world. The ultimate goal, however, is to become liberated from the cycle of death and rebirth that prolongs suffering. And this really goes to the question about what is the worldview, what is their life after death kind of thought. And the life after death, in their minds, they want to escape that. That's not a good thing. It's a redundant suffering of over and over being born and reborn and reborn and reborn. And it's all based on karma. The concept that we talked about before, your virtue, the virtuous actions add to your good karma. The non-virtuous actions add to your bad karma. And that determines where you'll be born, how you'll be born in the next life. And so, in this view, in this Buddhism view, this guy that I'm telling you about, the Buddha, was the very first one to establish. He's the founder. But in the Buddhist worldview, looking backwards, what they say is he's just one of a great number of Buddhas. And so when, and it hasn't happened yet, but when the world forgets the teachings of this Buddha, another Buddha will come along, become enlightened, and teach this again. And so the book that I'm reading says that this has gone on for billions of years in countless numbers of worlds. So it's bigger than just here and now. I was reading, Miss Gail Lee asked me this. She's not here today. I think she's in Africa. I think she's in Africa looking at apes, great gorillas. That's true. I mean, I'm seeing pictures of them on her Facebook feed. So she's over there, I guess in the Congo, Is that, anybody know? I think she's in the Congo, where Jane Goodall was and all that kind of stuff. So that's where she is. But she asked this. She asked about the way, their worldview on creation. And Buddhists don't believe in a beginning of anything. They believe it's all cyclical. Can anybody guess why? Given what I've said all through this. Rebirth, that's part of it. There's nothingness. And if there was ever absolute nothing in this world, which they believe is an illusion. They believe this is just an illusion. If there's absolutely nothing and then there's something, what does that mean? There has to be a beginning. And if there is a beginning, there has to be a beginner. Somebody who, so even the Buddhists with their worldview recognize that everything can't come from nothing. There has to be a source. And it's very interesting. So they say that there was never a time that there was nothing. It's just, it always was and always going. It's just a very interesting concept because there is no overarching one God. Now they believe in lots of gods, and I'm going to, I'm going to show it to you in just a second. They believe in lots of gods, and I'll tell you how they believe that. So here we go. This is where lots of gods come in. Buddhism's cosmos, the way they view all that is. They believe that it's divided into three realms. The realm of desire, that's kind of where we're hanging out now. The realm of desire. Remember, desire is bad because what does desire bring? Suffering. Desire brings suffering. So, realm of desire, the realm of form, and the formless realm. All right, I know that that's weird, but that's just the way it is. The realm of desire, the realm of form, and the formless realm. So here's what they believe about life after death. As you live, you are building up karmic energy. Karma, good and bad, or virtuous and non-virtuous in your life. It's building up according to your account. So when you die, you are reborn without remembering. You were reborn again in the realm of desire based on your karma. So if you have really, really good karma or really, really virtuous karma, you will be born a high caste, a king, a priest, or a god, a little g god. Those gods, when they expend their karmic energy, they are reborn. They're not even escaping. They're reborn something else, and somebody else takes their place. So there's this appearance in Buddhist literature or thought that these gods, remember I said Mara was the god of the dead. So the same person hasn't always been the god of the dead, but the god of dead has always existed. It's like a role or an office that you are reborn into. And so if you're really good, you get to be born as a god. When your karmic energy is expelled, you come back as a person or as a cow or as an ant on a pile of dung. I mean, all of these things are possibilities, depending on your karmic charge, your virtuous or non-virtuous life. And so you are reborn over and over and over again in those ways. That's the wheel, all in the realm of desire. Even the best, all you could be is a little g god, and when your karmic energy is expelled, you'll come back as something else.
What's your next life after an ant?
After an ant? I don't know. I do. The only reason why I know that an ant is a possibility because somebody was ordained as a Buddhist monk. He didn't, I can't remember the whole story, but the Buddha said that he's okay because he envisioned him as an ant on a pile of dung, and when the water washed away, it washed him over one of the holy places in Buddhism, and so he came back better as a man who could then be ordained as a monk. So this is, I'm just telling you, this is very different than the way that we view life. This is very anti-Christian. Let me just stop now and say that my view of the way this all works. After mankind had sinned, and they split up after the Tower of Babel, so now they're spread out across the earth, there are peoples who lost connection with the one true God. But they still had a need to explain all of life. How'd the world get here? Who is man? What's our problem? Where are we headed? Well, without the revelation of God, without God revealing himself, we are left to our own interpretation of all those things. Every religion in the world seeks to answer those questions I just talked you through. Every religion does. How did we get here? Who are we? What's our problem? Where are we going? How will we succeed? Every one of them answers that. I believe that Christianity is the only one that answers them from a perspective of revelation of God, where God has revealed himself. We are also the only one that can grant forgiveness of sin, not we, but Jesus, based on his sacrifice in our place. All the others, the closest one is old-fashioned, Old Testament Judaism, not present-day Judaism. Remember, they don't have any sacrifices. Old-fashioned Judaism, and it was only for a year. Remember, that's what Hebrews says. We haven't been forgiven or redeemed by the blood of bulls and goats, and then only for 1 year. But once for all time, our great high priest has walked into the heavenlies offering himself as a sacrifice for our sins. And so I'm telling you, no other religion has that. I'm just saying, I can say this because Paul did. Remember, Paul said, if Christ is not raised, then we are we're miserable. So I can say it this way. If Christ was not raised, we still are the only religion in the world that offers complete forgiveness of sin. All the other ones are weighing in a balance between good and evil, or virtuous and non-virtuous, and those kinds of things. So Christianity is distinct in offering complete forgiveness of sin through the sacrifice of its founder, the Savior. So divided into three realms. Realm of desire. So how do you get to the realm of form and then the formless realm? You do it by meditation. And you do it by meditating on the Buddha's doctrines, the Buddha's teachings. One's karma dictates rebirth in the realm of desire. I just talked through all that. One's achievement of meditative states cause advancement in the realm of form or in the formless realm. So in the realm of form, there are 4 levels based on the 4 levels of consciousness. All of this is built into the system. I can't really explain it. But if you achieve those levels of consciousness, you can escape into the realm of form. And ultimately, the formless realm is where you want to be. But all of these lives are measured in millions of years. So now you're stuck in the realm of form or in the formless realm for 1 million years, still on this. And if your karmic charge gives out, you'll return. So the hope is ultimately to follow the Buddha and escape all of this and go to nirvana, which is the acceptance of nothingness. That's the other book, the something of nothingness. Anyway, that's the other book I had to read in freshman English, talking about wasted life. Only by following the Buddha's teachings will bring one to nirvana. Now here's here's what lots of people say. There's like, oh, Buddhism is so inclusive. You can believe in Christianity and Buddhism. You can believe in Hinduism and Buddhism. It's just so inclusive. It's really not. Because what they believe is that you can build up good karma as a Christian, but you can't escape the wheel unless you follow Buddha. You can't, and it's just a different mindset. And I know I'm blowing some of your minds. I can watch you rub your heads and all that stuff. But this is what Buddhism is. It is the attempt to escape, well, two things. Remember, it's to lessen suffering now, and it's to escape to nothingness ultimately. That's the goal of Buddhism, the twin goals. Let me talk. Let's see, I've got 15 minutes. I won't do it. Let's keep going. So the different schools of Buddhism, there are differences in Buddhism. Remember, I told you that in like the first 100 years, they started to divide. It's divided in 3 large branches, but then in all kinds, it affects all kinds. There's if you want to see them all, Google branches of Buddhism, and you'll see a graph that has 100, 200 different schools of Buddhism out of it. But there's 3 main branches. Theravada Buddhism is called the Way of the Elders, mainly found in Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia, so mainly Southeast Asia. It went that way. The Way of the Elders means that, and this is more of that caste system. Remember, it's running in the background. That only the monks could do this. So you had to completely renounce everything and live as a monk or a nun. That's what they called female. But even like the Buddha's mom, there's writings that say that it was good that she died so that she could come back a man. So there's a real misogyny built into this that says that only men count, and so that's also being reborn. You know, if you have good karma, you'll be reborn a man. If you have bad karma, you'll be reborn a woman. That's just maybe because women suffer more than men. I don't know, but anyway, it's all built in, right? It's built in. So, but they do have lady nuns, or their version of female monks. And so they call the Way of the Elders. This means that it's not for the common person. It's only for those who... So think, anybody ever see Robin Williams in Good Morning Vietnam? Yes. All right. So, and the only line, well, one of only a couple of lines that I remember from the movie is, "It's so hot that a little man in an orange robe just burst into flames." Right? Y'all remember that? Y'all remember that line? One of his jokes. But he's talking about the Buddhist monks who had come to such a place in their life that they could set themselves on fire and without running off in protest or whatever, because they are nothing. Remember, the whole idea is to get to nothingness. And so that's the Way of the Elders. Number 2, Mahayana Buddhism. Now, Mahayana means the great vehicle, the big vehicle. So think Theravada is the Way of the Elders. Now Mahayana is for everybody. This is like the populist version of Buddhism, the great vehicle. It's found in China and Taiwan, Japan and Korea, so mainly East Asia. And it is for the common person. So you don't have to be a monk to practice. You can practice it in your own life, and you can still overcome the circle without being a monk. So you don't have to come back as a monk. You can just be an average person. This is where Zen Buddhism comes from. It fits in right here. Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of a Chinese word called Chen. And the Japanese called it Zen, and that's where we get Zen Buddhism from. And it is more esoteric, more anybody can practice just a little bit a day. You don't have to give your whole life to it. You can just go and do your meditation and come up with the same results. That is a very white boy Southern description. It's more than that, but you don't need to know all that they do. So anyway, the third big different school is Vajrayana Buddhism, which is also known as Tibetan Buddhism. This branch is led by the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama. And so this is Tibetan Buddhism. It's called the diamond. They call it that because it endures. That's Vajrayana. It endures. Found in Tibet and Mongolia and the other Himalayan states. So whenever you see Bruce Wayne going up into the Himalayas with the blue flower to learn about how to become Batman in Batman Begins, he was learning it from Vajrayana Buddhists. When you know somebody is I grew up reading the comics, right? That's the worst thing about newspapers going out of existence is I don't get the funny papers on Sunday. But you remember that there were a couple of different comics where somebody would climb up the mountain to get to the very top where this guy would be sitting, meditating, and you ask them great questions of life. That's Vajrayana Buddhism, where they were in the mountains and they were off by themselves, and it's called the diamond. That's really all I know about the different schools. It's mainly divided by where they are, not necessarily by, like we would call a denomination, and you go, you have 6 different churches in an area and you go to the one that suits you best. That's not really the way this is. It's really in areas the way they are. Yes, sir.
I remember a cartoon where someone was climbing the mountain to reach Buddha because there was a goat.
Yeah, goat. Yeah, I've seen that. That leads me to, there are some unanswerable. I hit it, but do you know that in those cartoons sometimes the yogi or the guru or whoever up there wouldn't answer them, called the noble silence? Does that ring a bell at all? They just wouldn't answer. The question of where the universe comes from is one of those unanswerable questions. They won't answer that question. They don't even entertain it. Don't even think about it because of what I mentioned. That's just it just clicked with me with that. So those are the different schools. So what about sharing Christ with a Buddhist? How do you do it? You have to come to the realization that there is a completely different worldview that you are connecting with. So what do you do? And there's, by the way, anytime we talk about discussion of the gospel with anybody, your next door neighbor, an adherent to Islam, anybody, it doesn't matter. You are dealing with something supernatural. You have to understand that first and foremost. That when somebody is saved, it's not just a decision only. It is a decision. They are repenting of their sins and trusting Christ. But it's a new birth. It's a complete transformation of a person. So whenever I talk about things like sharing Christ with a Buddhist, I am not giving you a formula that if you follow it, it will result in somebody trusting Christ. That's not what, because that doesn't even work with somebody who grows up in that worldview, right? I believe that the Holy Spirit has to remove the scales from our eyes in order for us to see who Christ really is. And so it's not just like 6 ways to lead your neighbor to Christ. All right, that's not what I'm talking about. But these are some things to keep in mind. First, begin with the triune God, that unmoved mover from the very beginning, which is a philosophy thought, but that one who existed before anything else, that constant, eternal, not created, unlike any other God. All right, so that's where you have to start, because that's right away what they would differ. You can't just say God, because they have gods, but they believe the gods are on the wheel too. So you have to start with the one who was not created, who has existed before time. Number 2, discuss creation out of pleasure instead of necessity. God didn't create the world because he needed something. He created because he wanted to. He created because he's creative. He created because he deserves glory, and so he created creatures to give him glory. All right, so you have to go there. Discuss creation out of his pleasure instead of out of necessity. Show that sin and the fall is the source of brokenness in the world, not the wheel. This world was not created to be a source of suffering. It was man's sin against God that introduced that suffering into the world. So you go to there, and then our personal sin must be dealt with. It's personal sin. It's not karmic energy that builds up over time. It is personal sin that we will spend all eternity paying for unless somebody else pays for it. And that somebody else has already done it, and so you introduce Christ. I was talking to Becca yesterday, and we were talking about this idea of sharing Christ. So I want to talk you through something very quickly that may be a help as you talk to anybody, not just Buddhists, anybody about the gospel. And that is, begin by asking questions. Where do you think the world came from? Do you believe in God? What do you think happens to a person after they die? Any of those kinds of things. Just ask and let them answer. Don't correct them. Don't challenge them with Scripture. Just listen to what they say. And then after they say whatever it is that they say, I'm a Zoroastrian and I think that that's the way to nirvana or whatever. However they answer it, then you ask this one question. If you were wrong, would you want to know? If you were wrong, would you want to know? Now, if they say no, you could have a doctorate in theology and not take them any further than that no. Because if they like what they're doing and they don't want to change, they don't want to know truth, then you're going to waste your breath. But if you say, if you were wrong, would you want to know? And they say yes, now you've got an invitation that is open to share with them from the Bible what God's Word has to say about whatever it is that your next step. Even that doesn't guarantee that they're going to trust Christ, but what you've just done is you've identified a person who is open to talking about the true things of Scripture, and you can bring that to bear in their lives. So does that help? That's the way I do it. If I always get permission to share the gospel. Well, I don't always. If somebody comes into my office and needs something from me, they've asked for my permission to share the gospel. I don't ask it again. But if I'm out in the world and I'm talking to them and somebody says something different than what I think, I say, hey, if what do you believe about that? And explore it, let them talk, and then say, if what you believe was wrong, would you want to know? And if they say, yeah, I think I'm open to that, then I would open the Word with them and share what I believe about salvation and Christ and the one true God and those things. So, all right. Where's Joan? Buddhism. Buddhism. One day. Now let me tell you, I want to tell you something else. This is what I almost said and I backed away. When I was talking about the different influences, Buddhist influences in our modern, just in our culture, two movies popped into my head immediately. Y'all know I watch a lot of movies. And if you don't know, I'm telling you right now, just because I mention a movie title doesn't mean you need to go out and watch it. Because I did have a life at one time where I've watched a lot of stuff that I probably shouldn't have, well, I know I shouldn't have watched. So this is not recommendation. But there are two that popped into my mind when I was thinking about the influence of Buddhism in our culture. The first one was Good Morning Vietnam, with him saying, it's hot, it's Africa hot. And then he says, it's so hot, I just saw a little man in an orange robe burst into flames. That's the first one. That is the introduction of Buddhism and the thought of it, the picture of that. Some of you are old enough to probably have seen it on TV or seen it in a newspaper. I saw it in a textbook. I am not old enough to remember the Vietnam War, although I I have a vague memory of hearing about the fall of Saigon on the radio going to school as a kindergartner, 5-year-old. But some of you remember that. The second one is the one that do not go and watch unless it's on regular TV, and even then, be careful. And that's a movie called Caddyshack. All right? Caddyshack. Now, I want to take you to just one scene. I remember it clearly. Carl, who is played by Bill Murray. Carl, what is Carl? Does anybody remember? He's the groundskeeper. What's his background? He was a Vietnam vet. Remember? So, because when he's going after the gopher, he's Gopher Kong, he says, all that stuff. So he's a Vietnam vet, which means that he understood Buddhism. So at the very 10, 15, 20 minutes in, when they're all around the caddy shack, and he puts the kid up against the wall with a pitchfork. Y'all remember the kid's up against the wall, and he says, one day I was a looper for the Dalai Lama, the flowing robes, His Majesty, all of that. And then he says, so I got to the end of the round, and I said, hey, Lama, how about a little something for the effort? And the Dalai Lama looked at me and he said, there'll be no cash, but on your deathbed, you'll receive total consciousness. That's Buddhism. Total consciousness is coming to the place where you don't see you see through the illusion, you recognize that there's really nothing, and you get off the wheel and go to nirvana, which is nothing. That's Buddhism. And that's how it comes in and I love Caddyshack. It's one of, my favorite line from the movie, since I'm just telling lines, is when the Judge Schmales, comes up to Chevy Chase's character, and he says, hey, Ty, how'd you shoot today? And Ty says, I didn't keep score. And he says, well, how do you measure yourself with other golfers? And he says, by height. That's my favorite line. So if you ever come up to me and you ask me, how'd you shoot today? And I say, I didn't keep score. And you say, how do you know how you did? I might say it by height. But anyway, so that's Buddhism. Very different. It's built on Hinduism. It's built on top of it. But it is distinctly different. Where Hindus think they're going to something, becoming a part of something, Buddhists think you're going away from something to become nothing, ultimately. Yeah, that's cheerful, huh? But remember, before we judge it, remember, if you didn't know Jesus and you looked at the world, you would see nothing but suffering. And so you can understand how somebody coming from that worldview sees. I mean, it's understandable. And it's noble if there was no Christ. It's noble if there's no Christ. But there is a Christ. He did rise again from the dead, and we are guaranteed eternity with him if we put our faith in him. So don't be too judgmental, because except for God's grace, we'd be there too, right? So just recognize, just pray for the Buddhists to really get enlightened and to see who Jesus is. So anyway, that's Buddhism. I don't know what we'll do next. I'm still trying to swim back out of what I've been reading in Buddhism, but I will have something for you next week. I can't remember if we're going to go right to the cults next week, or if I'm going to do the new age. I can't remember if I'm going to do New Age in between or not. So I am going to do New Age. I just don't know where I'm going to do it. So it'll either be New Age next week, or it'll be Mormonism next week. We'll get to one of those. We'll get to one of those soon. So, all right. God bless you. Thanks for being here. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Shinto. Yeah, I skipped a lot of those Eastern religions because there's just not that many adherents. But Shintoism, Taoism, some of those others are Eastern religions. They're very similar, but yeah, that's right. That's right. I may do a one-over for that, but I need to go back and read. All right. God bless you. Y'all have a good day. Remember.